The year was 1789. A new nation was taking shape. The United States of America had just ratified its Constitution. The first presidential election was held. George Washington, a revered leader of the Revolutionary War, was unanimously elected as the first president. This election marked the beginning of a grand experiment in democracy. It was a moment filled with hope and the promise of a brighter future. Washington's election was unique for its unanimous consent. He was a symbol of unity and strength for a nation still finding its footing. The new government, with its balance of power and emphasis on individual liberties, was a beacon of hope for people around the world. Washington's presidency set the stage for a legacy of democratic principles that would shape the nation's course. However, the early years of the United States were also marked by stark contrasts. While the nation celebrated its newfound freedom, the right to vote was limited to a select few. Only white men who owned property were considered eligible to participate in the democratic process. This exclusionary system left a significant portion of the population without a voice in their own governance. The journey towards a more inclusive democracy was just beginning. The challenges faced by the fledgling nation were immense. Yet, the spirit of the American people, their belief in self-governance, and their unwavering pursuit of a more perfect union propelled them forward. The history of voting rights in the United States is a story of expansion, a gradual but determined movement towards a more inclusive democracy. This journey has been marked by numerous struggles, setbacks, and triumphs, each contributing to the evolving landscape of American suffrage. From the early restrictions of the Constitution, which initially limited voting rights to white male property owners, to the landmark amendments and legislation that followed, the struggle for suffrage has been a defining feature of the American experience. Each amendment, each piece of legislation, has been a step towards a broader and more inclusive electorate. Each step forward, often hard-won through protest and activism, has brought the nation closer to its ideals of equality and representation. The voices of those who fought for these rights echo through history, reminding us of the importance of perseverance and the power of collective action. The 15th Amendment, ratified in 1870, marked a significant milestone in the fight for suffrage. It was a beacon of hope for many, symbolizing a new era of potential equality. It granted African American men the right to vote, at least on paper. This amendment was a monumental step, but the reality of its implementation was fraught with challenges. However, the promise of this amendment was met with fierce resistance in the South. Many Southern states employed a variety of tactics to undermine the amendment and prevent African Americans from exercising their newly granted rights. Jim Crow laws, poll taxes, literacy tests, and grandfather clauses were just some of the tactics used to disenfranchise African Americans and maintain white supremacy. These measures were designed to be insurmountable barriers, effectively nullifying the progress made by the 15th Amendment. The fight for women's suffrage was another long and arduous battle. Women across the nation organized, protested, and lobbied for their right to participate in the democratic process. Women like Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton dedicated their lives to advocating for women's right to vote. Their leadership and unwavering commitment were instrumental in advancing the cause of women's suffrage. They organized marches, protests, and lobbying efforts, facing arrest and societal scorn for their beliefs. Despite the immense challenges, their resolve never wavered, and their efforts laid the groundwork for future generations. Their tireless efforts culminated in the passage of the 19th Amendment in 1920, which finally granted women the right to vote. This victory was a testament to their perseverance and the power of collective action. The expansion of suffrage did not end there. The fight for voting rights continued, as various groups sought to ensure that all citizens, regardless of race, gender, or socioeconomic status, could participate in the democratic process. The civil rights movement of the 1950s and 1960s brought renewed attention to the issue of voting rights. Activists and leaders from this era worked tirelessly to dismantle the systemic barriers that prevented African Americans from voting. African Americans in the South still faced significant barriers to voting, despite the protections of the 15th Amendment. These barriers included discriminatory practices like poll taxes, literacy tests, and outright intimidation. The brutal response to peaceful protests in Selma, Alabama, shocked the nation and galvanized support for voting rights legislation. The images of violence and the stories of those who suffered in the fight for equality spurred the passage of the Voting Rights Act of 1965, a landmark piece of legislation that sought to eliminate the barriers to voting for African Americans and other marginalized groups. Section 4. The tumultuous 19th century, Lincoln's election, and the Civil War. The 19th century was a period of immense change and upheaval in the United States. The country was rapidly transforming, driven by the forces of industrialization, westward expansion, and the contentious issue of slavery. The nation, still grappling with the legacy of slavery and the expansion of its borders, faced a defining moment in its history with the election of 1860. This election would set the stage for a conflict that would shape the future of the nation. Abraham Lincoln, a relatively unknown lawyer from Illinois, emerged as the candidate of the newly formed Republican Party, a party opposed to the expansion of slavery. His rise to prominence was swift and unexpected, capturing the attention of a nation divided. Lincoln's election sent shockwaves through the South. The Southern states, heavily reliant on an economy based on slavery, viewed his presidency as a direct threat to their way of life and economic interests. Southern states, fearing that their way of life was under threat, seceded from the Union, forming the Confederate States of America. This act of secession was a bold and unprecedented move, setting the stage for a national crisis. The nation was plunged into a bloody civil war, a conflict that would test the very fabric of American democracy. The Civil War was not just a battle over territory, but a profound struggle over the values and future direction of the United States. Lincoln's leadership during this tumultuous period proved instrumental in preserving the Union. His resolve and vision for a united nation guided the country through its darkest hours. The Civil War was a watershed moment in American history, not only for its impact on slavery and the preservation of the Union, but also for its lasting consequences on the political landscape. The war brought about significant social and economic changes, reshaping the nation in profound ways. The assassination of Lincoln just days after the Confederate surrender left a void in leadership and a nation struggling to heal. His death was a tragic blow to a country already weary from years of conflict. The Reconstruction era that followed was marked by efforts to integrate formerly enslaved people into society and rebuild the South. This period was fraught with challenges as the nation grappled with the complexities of reunification and justice. The legacy of slavery and the Civil War continued to cast a long shadow over American politics. The scars of the conflict and the unresolved issues of racial inequality persisted, influencing the nation's trajectory for decades to come. The disenfranchisement of African Americans in the South, despite the passage of the 15th Amendment, became a stain on the nation's conscience. Efforts to suppress the rights of African Americans highlighted the ongoing struggle for true equality. The fight for equal rights and voting rights for all citizens would continue for generations to come. The Civil War and its aftermath set the stage for future movements and battles for civil rights, underscoring the enduring quest for justice and equality in America. Section 5. The Progressive Era and Women's Right to Vote. The turn of the 20th century ushered in the Progressive Era, a period of social and political reform aimed at addressing the ills of industrialization and urbanization. This era was marked by a widespread belief that government intervention could bring about social justice and improve the lives of ordinary people. Progressives fought for workers' rights, consumer protection, and government regulation of big business. They believed that unchecked corporate power was a threat to democracy and sought to curb its influence through legislation and advocacy. Among their many causes, the fight for women's suffrage took center stage. Women from all walks of life joined the movement, united by the belief that they deserved the same political rights as men. Women, increasingly engaged in public life and demanding a greater role in society, intensified their efforts to secure the right to vote. They formed organizations, held public meetings, and used the media to spread their message. They organized marches, protests, and lobbying campaigns, challenging traditional gender roles and demanding equal rights. These activities were often met with resistance, but the suffragists remained undeterred. Leaders like Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton, pioneers of the suffrage movement, continued to inspire generations of activists. Their tireless work laid the groundwork for future successes and kept the momentum of the movement alive. The efforts of suffragists gained momentum during World War I. As men went off to fight, women stepped into roles that had previously been closed to them, proving their capability and challenging societal norms. Women's contributions to the war effort, both at home and abroad, challenged traditional notions of femininity and highlighted the injustice of denying them a voice in a democracy they were helping to defend. Their work in factories, offices, and on the front lines demonstrated their indispensability to the nation. The war created a political climate more receptive to women's suffrage. The sacrifices and contributions of women during the war made it increasingly difficult to justify their exclusion from the democratic process. In 1920, after decades of struggle, the 19th Amendment to the Constitution was finally ratified, granting women the right to vote. This victory was the result of relentless advocacy, strategic campaigning, and the unwavering belief in the principle of equality. This landmark achievement was a testament to the perseverance of suffragists and a significant step towards a more inclusive democracy. Women across the country celebrated this hard-won right, marking a new chapter in American history. However, the fight for equal rights was far from over. The 19th Amendment was a crucial milestone, but it did not end all forms of discrimination against women. Women, particularly women of color, continued to face discrimination and disenfranchisement. The intersection of race and gender created additional barriers that many women had to overcome in their quest for equality. The struggle for equality would continue. The legacy of the suffrage movement lives on in the ongoing fight for women's rights, reminding us that the pursuit of justice and equality is an enduring endeavor.